It will be a very interesting discussion about the place of technologies, and particularly communications technologies, in redefining humanitarianism. I'd like to welcome Nabil Ben Soussia from the IEC, Asia and Middle East and Commonwealth Independent States, who's Chief Executive for those areas, and also Mr. Stephen Tompkins of Inmarsat. When faced with the scale of humanitarian need as we are today, in the midst of a pandemic that has impacted quite literally everyone on the globe in a very personal way, and with the ever more complex, more difficult to access and more challenging contexts that we all, national and international, work in, then the question is, what do we need to do differently? How can we improve, and how can we work more effectively with the men, women and children affected by disaster and conflict for better outcomes for them? The World Humanitarian Forum has a big vision, a call to action to reshape the future of humanitarian aid. In recent times, there's been much discussion about what and how we can do better. We recognise the gaps between unmet need, funding flows, capacities to respond, preparedness that's too slow, and insufficient anticipation of an event. Donors have encouraged the humanitarian sector to work closer together, but it is difficult to overcome the barriers to that, however well-intended people are. The Black Lives Matter movement spotlighted some of the shortcomings in the sector, particularly in relation to race and ethnicity, but also in relation to the structural inequalities brought about by a system based on last century geopolitical influence. The times are changing and we need to change with them. There are many lenses that we could look at these challenging questions through, but this session focuses particularly on the technology lens. Whilst we face challenges, as I've outlined briefly, and a sense of not achieving enough with and for the people facing such profound difficulties, there are nonetheless excellent examples of how technologies can and do contribute. We will hear about some of those case studies in our session, and we'll have an opportunity to analyse how SATCOM connectivity and the trends around that can really bring about some solutions in the future. So before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to encourage you to populate the chat box or the Q&A box with any questions that you've got now or as a result of the presentations and discussions. And I hope that we can pick up as many of those questions as possible. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Stephen Tompkins, who is the Director of Market Development for Inmarsat Enterprise. He's responsible for leveraging Inmarsat's world-leading satellite services to enable solutions for connected industries in some of the most remote and challenging locations across the world. He leads global market strategy and executions for key land markets, including humanitarian, agriculture, transport, utilities, and others. He has a background in consultancy and new business development with experience across multiple industries, including agriculture, where he has a strong technical background, and has led consultancy projects for global public sector bodies and multinational food and drink businesses. So a lot of different experiences there, which I think will be really interesting. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Liz. I'll just wait for my slides to come up. So I guess while we're waiting to do that, it's great to be with you here today at the World Humanitarian Forum. The humanitarian community is a really important one for Inmarsat, actually. We've been connected with the community for a very long time. We're a very long time user of our products and services, and I think we have a special relationship with the community, and so delighted to give you a bit of an update today. What I'm going to focus on is a bit about Inmarsat for those of you who haven't come across us before. And then I'm really going to major on some of the new solutions that are being used in the SATCOM world to enable the virtualisation of humanitarian operations. If we can go to the next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know us, and so as Inmarsat, we're the global market leader in mobile satellite communications. We've been doing it for about 40 years now. We were actually set up as an intergovernmental organisation of the United Nations back in 1979, and that was to provide a world safety network over the world's oceans to enable triggers of disasters and communication back to land. And what we do in principle is we have 14 satellites that's in geostationary orbit, 35,000 kilometers above the Earth, and they provide internet and voice communications wherever our users are located. So wherever you don't have 3G, 4G, 5G, 2G, then satellite is there. And the humanitarian community has been a big user of our services over the years, but we're active in lots of other sectors as well. So the maritime sector really is our heritage. We still provide critical safety services at sea today, as well as a host of other services in the maritime sector. We're very active in aviation. So if you've been on a plane recently, which may not be likely, but if you have and use passenger broadband services, then they're probably provided by our network. We're very active in government and defence. And then I sit in the enterprise business unit, which is really everything on land that's not government and defence. So alongside humanitarian, that would be oil and gas, utilities, agriculture, transport, and a whole host of other sectors. Slide, please. So we have a range of different services. I think the excuse me, the humanitarian community probably know us most for our BGAN service, our broadband global area network service. So this is essentially a small form factor device that's used principally in disaster response. So it is a 3G network in the sky powered by SATCOM. And typically what happens is when a disaster strikes, telecommunications are wiped out. This device is used to pull out of a backpack and provide that 3G level internet connectivity, which can work anywhere, to do a number of things in terms of coordinating the humanitarian response, sending emails, accessing platforms, whatever's needed to do to coordinate that response effectively. And that's probably what the humanitarian community know us best for. The other thing that's used often from our portfolio is the iSat phone 2. So that is a sat phone, does what it says on the tin, provides voice coverage anywhere you're located. Right over to the left there, we've got our Land Express service, and that's essentially our broadband level service over SATCOM, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on, so I won't major on it here. And then in the middle there, we've got our machine-to-machine services. So these are the things that are sending data from machines from A to B. So our BGAN M2M service is used principally for things like environmental monitoring, so monitoring earthquakes, monitoring floods. Wherever you've got a very remote location to send data from A to B, you don't have that terrestrial coverage and you need something reliable to depend on to get that data back to the platform where it's visualized. And then our iSat Data Pro service is really the equivalent of that, but in a messaging-based service. So it's a very small form factor device, has a very low power consumption. In the context of humanitarian operations, it's probably most used for things like vehicle tracking. So if you have a large fleet of vehicles, there's an increasing demand as we see greater and greater empowerment of those teams to know where those vehicles are, what's happening with them. Is there a fault with the engine, for example? Do you need to pull it in to have some maintenance done before it breaks down? Is there a fridge in the back that has COVID vaccines in it and you need to monitor the temperature? Anything where you have small packets of data to send from A to B. So really this slide just shows our coverage. So this is our Lband network. So this is the network that's powering our BGAN and our M2M and sat phone products. And that just shows our coverage map. You can see that's pretty much global apart from the extreme poles, provides coverage everywhere. So we have these satellites up. They've been up for 40 years. They will be up for the years to come. And the next slide will illustrate that if we go there. So we've got continued investment in our Lband services. So this is kind of what the humanitarian community knows us for. I think our Lband BGAN services, they've been around for a long time, but they will continue to be around into the future. We have our Inmarsat 6 launch this year, which is a dual payload satellite. It does Ka band and Lband, and basically it will ensure that all of those services are available well into the future, well into the 2040s for the next 15 years or so, so humanitarian operations can depend on those. Really, I think what we're seeing is that the future of needs in the humanitarian community and a lot of the other industries we're serving are changing. So it's now not just about providing a connectivity method for camps when a disaster strikes to provide you that basic 3G connection. Now there's a need to connect a load of other things. So I've mentioned vehicles already, I've mentioned sensors, there's a whole load of other devices that enable that virtual humanitarian operation. And that means really that the bandwidth needs are changing. The services we have to provide to enable those systems are changing. And so we're responding to that. And really the future of Lband is, as I've termed it here, bridging that bandwidth gap. So we have a number of planned developments. So with our BGAN network, today that's about 400 to 500 kilobits a second. We have planned investment in that through a project to enable higher speeds, so potentially up to 1 megabits a second. And really that's coping with the demand for higher volumes, higher speeds that need to be transmitted through the terminal, different data that needs to be transmitted. But it's not just about higher bandwidth, it's also about lower bandwidths as well. So what we know from our customers is that there are a number of other applications that maybe don't need the speeds of 400 kilobits a second. Maybe they have lower bandwidth needs. So I'm thinking particularly here, things like vehicles, enabling voice control in vehicles, enabling basic data to be sent from vehicles. People probably don't want to pay for the expense of a terminal that can get up to 400 kilobits a second and the airtime associated with that. So we're currently investigating how we bring a diverse range of offers that mean you can potentially get lower speeds at a lower cost to the user to enable a greater number of things to be connected. And then if we look to our messaging service, the ISAT Data Pro, the IDP that I mentioned earlier, again, we're seeing the needs change there. Typically, this has been used for the tracking applications, the sensing applications, and it's no longer just about sending simple messaging data from A to B. There's more and more comprehensive needs there. So if I think of use cases like water monitoring, for example, people don't just want to be able to monitor the amount of water in a tank anymore. They want to be able to turn the pump on and off in real time, maybe take a low resolution image of the site. And so we have planned investment in that service to provide higher bandwidth speeds there to cope with those use cases. So really it's about bridging that bandwidth gap, providing the flexibility for a greater number of use cases to enable the virtualization of those operations. I wanted to flag up one product here that's gaining a lot of traction in the humanitarian community, which is the Prism PushtoTalk solution from one of our value-added manufacturers, Cobham, which is used via the BGAN system. And really the challenge this addresses is, I think there's a greater need to connect teams on the ground. As we're seeing operations become more virtual, more and more stuff is moving to online. There's more and more of a need to connect to teams out in the field from a distant location. And so traditionally, what people have done to maintain that voice contact is use a number of different systems within a vehicle. So they may be using an MF or HF radio network, a terrestrial radio network for that long-range radio. They're probably using a VHF radio network in there as well. And because those systems are terrestrial, probably the operator of that vehicle also has a sat phone, so that if they go out of coverage, they can always get voice contact back to base. But that introduces its own complexity. These are all separate systems. You all have to have different contracts with the suppliers. You've got to maintain all those different systems. And so when you have a fleet of 1,000 or more vehicles, for instance, then that becomes more and more of a logistical nightmare to manage. And also those systems only provide voice connectivity and no data. So what Cobham have done is produce the Prism PushtoTalk system, which essentially enables you to incorporate all your existing voice systems into one gateway, but then the gateway itself allows you to utilize publicly available hybrid radio networks, so LTE and also 3G, so you can reduce the overall total cost of ownership of your system by using those public networks, but then also have the confidence that if you go out of the coverage of that LTE, you'll fail over to satellite. So you'll use the satellite when you go out of coverage. And that's all encompassed within one system that integrates everything together. So it lowers the overall total cost of ownership. It provides you that confidence that you're going to have voice connectivity everywhere. And it simplifies all those systems into one system that you can maintain on a regular basis. Also, of course, it gives you the data capability because you've got the BGAN service on the top of it and the ability to use 3G networks. So increasingly, it's turning that vehicle into a mobile command center that's simpler for the organization to manage and also provides extra services. So I wanted to just touch on our Ka-band constellation. All the products I've talked about today are through our Lband network, but our Ka-band network provides much higher speeds, broadband level speeds, and really this is catering to the fact that we're living increasingly in a world where higher bandwidth is required. So we know that today the broadband global area networks service is usually used as something that can be very quickly deployed in a disaster before a more long-term solution that provides higher bandwidth is set up. And the Ka-band service provides that higher bandwidth. So our Global Express service, as we call it, has a constellation that we've invested heavily in. It's used heavily in the maritime and the aviation sectors, and now increasingly it's being used on land, including by humanitarian organizations. So typically what would have happened before is that humanitarian operations would have probably used a VSAT style system, a fixed satellite services system, to provide those higher bandwidth use cases, which is really good for longer term deployments where you need that higher bandwidth. But increasingly we're seeing that the GX service, LX Land Express as we call it on land, is being used for its ability to pull up out the vehicle, pop out and transmit at broadband level speeds. And you can do that very quickly because it's a Ka-band service, so you don't need a trained VSAT operator to set up that system, and you also don't need to request authorization for the system to come online from the operator. It's very quick to deploy, very flexible to use. You can pull it out of a vehicle or a hire car in no time, and you can check it into an airline bag as well because it's a small weight. And so increasingly we're seeing that this is filling a kind of gap in the market where you need that flexibility for broadband level speeds, but you also have to be able to take the terminal very quickly from A to B to different sites. There is high network reliability with this, and you can choose your committed information rate for guaranteed peace of mind. And then there's a variety of terminals as well. So that ranges from large dishes, which are more permanent installations, through to very small form factor auto-acquire terminals that simply receive a signal from the satellite, auto-point themselves to it, and provide connectivity very quickly. So increasingly we're seeing that the humanitarian community are utilising this service to cope with those higher bandwidth use cases. So really that's everything from me today. I wanted to give you that update on our network and our roadmap. We're very committed to the humanitarian sector, and I think the key takeaways for me is that the needs and the use cases are changing. We're reflecting that in how we're providing our services and trying to provide that flexibility to end users. It's no longer just about connecting a camp, it's about connecting a range of assets to enable that virtualization of humanitarian operations, and happy to expand on that in the discussion later. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much. Really, really interesting to hear about those developments and see the sort of flexibility that it would enable the humanitarian sector to have with those various changes. So fantastic, and we'll come back to some of them, I'm sure, in some of the questions a bit later. So it's my pleasure now to move on and introduce Mr. Nabil Ben Soussia. He is the Chief Executive for the IEC Telecom Group, Chief Executive for Asia, the Middle East and CIS. He is a high-performing leader with extensive experience in the MENA region. He joined the IEC Telecom Group as Director of Technologies and Operations in 2008. And in the capacity of Business Unit Director, he played a key role in the opening of the Abu Dhabi office in 2011, and then the opening of a new office in Kazakhstan in 2014. With his work, he has been instrumental in earning international recognition for the IEC Telecom, including Thuraya Best Performing SP Maritime in 2014 and 2018. YARCLIC Service Partner of the Year in 2014 and YARCLIC Innovation Excellence Award in 2018. So looking forward to hearing your presentation. Nabil, over to you.
Thank you, Liz. Hello, everyone. just waiting for my slides to pop up. I'm logging, yeah. So the presentation today will be about how the operations are changing within the humanitarian world, the new missions, the new realities, and how to be also in par with the GSM in terms of having a variety of solutions and applications that are available for the people on the ground. So the SATCOM operators or the SATCOM solutions in the humanitarian context are mainly and used to be mainly for critical interventions in the beginning and maybe later on for management of camp and for longer operation. But we will focus a little bit on what we do in terms of quick recovery, fast deployment. All those solutions were in the beginning done just for real-time reporting, consultation, tracking for deployed mission, health and safety for the front workers, and remote support for the maintenance. So the overall services were done and addressed to the humanitarian professionals, to the people doing business in the ground. It was not really addressed to bring additional service to the people in need. So there is a change that started. I would not say it just started with the COVID. It started a bit before, but it was more and more obvious. It became during the COVID time, where it became much more difficult to bring people or to give service physically. So there was a need to go to the remote places and offer the services there. So we'll just try to touch base on this and see how this change happened, how the technology can support that. So the most important challenge is that there is a big digital divide in the world, and we still have 3.8 billion people without access or what as internet access or remaining offline. This doesn't mean that in terms of services we offer to those people, it doesn't mean that we have to limit ourselves to the lack of connectivity. It doesn't mean that we have to serve those people the same way that we used to do offline. We can bring these solutions. We can manage to have services going down to them. Of course, the idea of having a big link and bringing all people in one camp and serve them there is or used to be the main focus, but we can also reach them. We don't need to have big links when we go to the people. We can equip cars and serve people by having cars just going around. And also with the services and with the services offered there, we can also help the humanitarian community to better manage their logistics, their way of doing things there, because it becomes easier to offer the service there. Now, connecting mobile units can offer a lot of services. We are showing just by, if you go to the next slide, we will show just a little bit how we do that in terms of technology. So we do the network management. Next slide, please. Yes, so introducing for us the OneGate platform. The OneGate platform is something that IC Telecom developed in the beginning for the maritime industry, where we do from a vessel everything, just connected vessels where we can manage everything. And we thought that there is a need also to have the same thing for cars and to have even the same thing in a case that you can fly with to be to work together with the vegan or with the Linux. So what we do, first thing is we do a hybrid solution. So we introduce the 4G network and the 3G network to the satellite system, where we can use it if it saves money to the humanitarian organization, and it makes also the service more accessible. So the dual mode between GSM and satellite mode is the key point here, of course, with the reliability of the connectivity with via satellite, but we reduce cost when it's possible. What we do also via this gateway is that we give the possibility to have remote access, and we give the possibility to upgrade and add new services. So the concept of virtualization here is you have the box, you have virtual machines inside, and you can upgrade, you can add new services. You don't have to deploy every time. You don't have to manage the logistics in a way that what should I send to this location, what should I send to that location, how we can upgrade. Everything is done remotely. You have that in a car or in a belly case, and you have your back office able to remotely set up the services you need for that. So the remote access, the remote work management via OptiView, it's also something where we give the possibility for the IT manager, for the people on the back office, to have a better visibility and to be able to solve the communication problem for people on the ground. So we don't need to have the people on the ground experts in telecommunication and being able to, or I'd say not being able, but having the need to spend time on fixing things here and there. We give the remote access, we give the full view for the people on the back office to help people on the ground to do what they are there for. And what we're trying even to move to the further step to have remote glasses, so we will really give eyes to the people on the ground, on the office, to help people on the ground and really guide them with all the necessary support. We will go later with a few services that we will see how we manage that. The key point here is that we are introducing virtual services inside the OneGate box. And those virtual services is what will help the humanitarian organization to give as a service. We thought about few applications that are common, mandatory for everyone. But of course, the key point is how to develop with the service providers the service and how we can integrate it to the box. So today we will speak about video conferencing. This became more and more required, and with the virtual or the lack of personal contact, at least having video conferencing is important. Remote maintenance, as discussed, telemedicine, of course, with the isolation we are having now and the lack of movement, the telemedicine became very important, and remote surveillance is also something that, again, those are the services that we have implemented in the box. But what we have in mind is just to reach the level of adding your own application there. So your logistic application, your virtual machine of counting people, distributing food, managing access, etc. All that can be hosted now in the OneGate box and can be given as a service that you offer to the communities. So we will speak here about the four services that the four main services, I would say, that are today there. One team is messaging and video conferencing. So we all have Teams, Zoom, etc. But all those applications are designed for terrestrial network, and all those applications require a lot of bandwidth. Our main point in the development is to keep the mobility. So we allow one team to work with a very low bandwidth, so that will save cost and that will allow you much more mobility, and where you can be able to use even an Lband terminal, and you have connected car with what Stephen was saying, that the idea of having more connected cars, cheaper hardwares with lower bandwidth. We also develop on the same direction, where even with those terminals, you will be able to maintain a video conference and do a file. One assist is for what you see here in on the top on the picture. Same thing. We developed a way to work via the Lband terminals, where you have a cost-effective, you have mobility. This is again every time the key point for us is the mobility, and the solution can operate in very low bandwidth environment, as low as 40 kilobits per second. So this is again for us an additional tool to help people on the ground to do what they know, and to be able to have support also from remote places. So it can give, of course, saving money, managing operation differently. But the most important thing is that bringing the knowledge to the field. This is how you can manage. If you cannot have the people moving to the field, if you cannot bring people from to the camps, you can reach them and you can have the support that you need. And for the next slide, that will be the concrete example of having the medical services going to the remote places. Of course, this requires a little bit of organization, but at least we have a way to have an encrypted transmission, a very low bandwidth usage, and also very easy to move. So it's really something where you need, it will help you when you need just to move to remote places. Next slide. And the monitoring, again, it's about transmitting video from remote places to command centers. That again, installed on a car, can bring the car all the required tools to transmit real picture, whether from the car, whether from how you see the damages, etc., etc. So it will help on the decision making. Again, all this is encrypted and always available from as low as 40 kilobits per second. Those are the main services we have here. And again, the key point here, if there's something again to take from my presentation, is that you don't need anymore to think about what should I take. Virtualization means that you take one box and you can just add more and more services on the go, depending on the situation, depending on what you need to do in your mission. Next, I think this was my last slide. So thank you, and feel free to ask any question.
Thank you very much, Nabil, for a really interesting description of OneGate. It sounds like an excellent tool to have in the toolkit. It gives us an opportunity to come now to some questions, and I'll just say to my colleagues in the back room offering us some technical support that I'm not seeing all of the participants in the room. So unfortunately, I may miss questions in the chat box. Please bring that to my attention if I do, or Stephen and Nabil, if you see a question that I've missed, then we'll grab it, because we do want to explore the audience's questions as well. But maybe to start, I mean, really fascinating to hear about the opportunities that these technologies offer us in the humanitarian world, and to hear the way you're thinking about flexibility, adaptability, and building on tools, so that you don't have to have multiple tools, but you can work with one or two and they can be effective for multiple solutions. So just to sort of kick us off then with some questions, I noticed that both of you were focusing on low bandwidth considerations. I know I've worked in many situations where that's been absolutely key, and I've certainly used various of your technologies to address that. I wonder if you ever see a time when we won't need to worry about low bandwidth, and if you do, what would we need to be innovating, or what would need to happen to achieve a time where low bandwidth issues are not our worry, if we want to work virtually? Maybe I'll go to you first, Stephen, and then any thoughts from you, Nabil. Over to you, Stephen.
Sure, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think what we're dealing with here from our perspective, from an Inmarsat perspective, is mobility. So mobility use cases are by their very nature where you want a terminal that's very compact, doesn't use much power, so you can put it on top of a vehicle, put it on top of a camera, or whatever it might be. And so, you know, those terminals have got to somehow communicate to the satellite, which are a very long way away, in our case 35,000 kilometers away. So there's always going to be some trade-off with that in terms of the amount of bandwidth you're going to get to that terminal. So I think that the future is bright for that, and we'll see more and more ability to get larger bandwidths through smaller terminals. Probably what that will take is more electronically steered antenna technology, the ability to get flat panel terminals that can go on a vehicle and get broadband level speeds. We're probably a few years away from that, I would say, at the moment, which is why the emphasis is very much on making sure our services are interoperating with technologies that are fit for purpose and use the right amount of data, so you can absolutely depend on them in those kind of remote environments.
Great, thank you very much, Stephen. Nabil, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I will. The main thing is reliability and mobility. So of course you can have big data, you can have big antennas, and you can have a high bandwidth for welfare. That's possible, and you will see the next generation of satellites are very good for welfare. But in the end, when it comes to reliability, when you will have the right terminal, the right speed, in the end, except video transmission and heavy files of really geologic data and all this space, there is no application that requires a lot of data. So if it is managed well, it will reliably send you what you need. And again, we are speaking about scalability also. You cannot equip today 1,000 car with big data. If you want 1,000 car that will transmit the required data, that will have to be first reliable and small. And this is where I would say, again, the focus of the humanitarian organization, because they're operating in foreign ground. Of course, when they have their camp and they are settled, they can put whatever they want. They can even bring fiber if they are settled for a long time. But the ready to deploy, the form factor is very important, the size, all that. So this is why we need to offer them the maximum with what they need. And they start with, I need the smallest thing.
Great, thank you for that. I think that's an optimistic message from you both, so I find that very encouraging. So that's great. We've got a couple of questions that I'd like to take sort of straight away from the audience. The first one is a question for you, Stephen, from Nicola. Her question is, what are the ethical issues in data collection and monitoring? Yeah, I think just if you can speak to the ethical issues around data collection, monitoring via satellite, and what you have in place to keep the data secure?
Yeah, sure. So, good questions. So, I mean, obviously there are ethical considerations, particularly if you're transporting personal data of some kind. I mean, our satellite network is in effect a public network like any other. So you send the data from A to B in the same way that you would send data over a public connection from A to B. There are options which people use to make that network more secure, like any network. And if you're dealing with personal data, then that's something that's often considered to make sure that that's all kept in line with regulations, GDPR or otherwise that are there. So there's flexible options to be able to achieve that, like there is with any network.
Great, thank you for that. Nabil, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, security solutions are also available, and I think we are not spying from a satellite to collect data without someone who purchased the terminal, implemented it. But additional to that, we have all the possibilities, including to have a VPN or an encryption even inside the same OneGate program.
Great. I mean, I think all of us probably feel that the security of people affected by disaster and conflict is really key. So it's encouraging to know that there are solutions to that. And I guess it's just about making those solutions accessible to everyone. That leads actually to a really interesting question that George has presented, which is when we think about new technologies, it's really important that we don't leave anybody behind. And I wonder if either of you would like to comment on that question.
I mean, I think from my perspective, in terms of making sure we leave no one behind, I guess, is making this technology as accessible as possible. So I think what you've probably seen from Nabil's presentation, for example, is that they're very focused on integrating the satellite with the value-added technologies so that it's easy for an end user to actually adopt that. And you know, we've talked about low bandwidth quite a lot, and one of the main objectives of doing that is not just so that the solution actually works, but so that it's affordable, because we know that Satcom is more expensive than public networks, and so the lower the data can be, the more accessible it is, because the more affordable it is for everybody. And that's not just unique to the humanitarian community. We're seeing that across agriculture and transport and many other industries. Our challenge really is integrating our networks with those value-added technologies as much as we can to make it as accessible for end users as possible. It's not just that situation of pulling a beacon out of a bag and providing a basic internet connection. You've got to provide the value with the added value stuff that's being developed.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a really, really good point. Nabil, do you want to add anything?
Same thing. In all our developments, we always try to use only the real data required. So we filter, we compress, but also we add hybrid solutions. So we introduce the 3G and 4G element also. So at least we offer, when available, the same service at low cost.
And I think that must be really encouraging for the smaller NGO that doesn't have a big budget to know that they can access some of these things more cost efficiently is probably really key, I would suggest. So
I would add even more that we have done a kind of scratch card. So in terms of instead of having everyone coming with his terminal, we have also the possibility to mutualize the same terminal. If you have a car equipped of a UN company or a UN organization, a small NGO will need just few small data to change or to emails, so they can utilize that with scratch cards and no need to have everyone coming with his own terminal and with our own investment.
Great, thank you very much, Nabil. So I've got another question here from Ricardo, and it is there any special action from Inmarsat or the telecom sector to push for enabling importation of telecom devices for humanitarian action in countries where such devices are restricted or banned? Good question.
Yeah, I mean, so we try as much as possible to make sure that our services are available globally, and we do that either directly with relationship with regulators or through our partner channels. So, you know, really, I would say that if there are specific countries where there's a demand and where you're seeing that we have a gap or they're not being used, then reach out to us or reach out to IEC, because probably in most cases actually there's a way to do it, and there's a partner who has the regulatory access, or there's a way that some services can be used, and it's just about finding that way. So yeah.
I will add here, it's really case by case, because you guys, you don't go when everything is fine. the setup we have and the regulation fixed at the time today when the problem happens, usually when it is natural catastrophe, then it's easy. When it is an armed conflict, then it becomes whatever regulation you had yesterday may become not valid today. So it's really on case by case, country by country, and it doesn't mean that we have it today that we will have it tomorrow, or and vice versa. So there are a lot of politics behind this.
So a clear message from both of you that if people are struggling with this, they should get in touch and see how you can sort of, you know, whether you have information about regulatory organizations or how people can solve the problem. Basically, you're willing to help, just get in touch with you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great, that's really helpful to know. I want to move on and ask a question about system interoperability, if I may, because you've both been talking about different technologies. And I guess that one of the questions for organizations, particularly with low maintenance budgets, is how you can make one thing work for multiple uses, and how that can be efficient, and if it can be efficient. So I wonder if we're thinking about system interoperability between different products and services, how do we make sure our connectivity services work in harmony with the things they need to connect to add value to the end user? I wonder if we might start with you, Nabil, this time.
So for us, we try always to make it interoperable. We try on technical level, we try always to collect everything on the IP level. So whether with Inmarsat or with any other provider, including other satellites or GSM, we collect the traffic on the IP level. So we try to give the same user experience to the end user, regardless the mean of transport of that information. So as you have seen, for example, in the OneGate, whether it comes through the GSM or through Inmarsat, it is the same user experience. Now, after that, you have seen also in Steven's presentation the possibility to integrate all the different radios within one gateway, so we can also transmit that over GSM or over satellite. There are a lot of efforts to do that. From our side, we always keep in mind the user experience. But of course, in terms of real life, it is not tomorrow that we will have I don't know, a Thuraya satellite to a Thuraya terminal that will accept, for example, an Inmarsat SIM card. Those are really proprietary. There are a lot of investment behind that. But in terms of user experience, there are a lot of things happening. And within the same also company like Inmarsat today, they are having the Lband, the 4G, integrating radio, integrating the K-band. So a lot of things that will help the user to keep the same user experience and to have main service, backup, etc., etc.
Great, thank you, Nabil. Stephen, any thoughts from you on that question?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's very top of mind for us, actually, because I think, as I alluded to in my talk, the use cases for SATCOM are changing. We're seeing the explosion of the Internet of Things, for example, all the different sensors and devices and vehicles and everything that need to be connected. And I think our challenge is making sure that the satellite is truly interoperable with those value-added systems that mean something to the end users. And I mean, we've just launched earlier this year a applications and solution provider program, which is essentially an effort to integrate with those value-added devices. So we've been doing a lot of that work in places like Australia, for instance, in the agriculture sector, different to humanitarian, but this was all about water monitoring, for instance, and embedding the satellite into a system that can monitor water for cattle, turn the pumps on and off in real time, provide camera images, and we want to do more of that, and the program's open to do that. So we're trying to identify those kind of key use cases for the humanitarian community to make sure we're interoperating there.
Well, that sounds great to hear, and I think probably both your comments, music to the humanitarians' ears, I suspect. We've got a couple of really interesting questions, but I'll go with this first one from Ricardo again. Is how limited or low bandwidth could allow enough video quality for real-time telemedicine from the field? Very good question. Who wants to answer it first?
I think we have the solution, and the direct answer. Just try it. Yes, we can show what we claim. We can go down to 40 kilobits per second. We are just compressing, prioritizing the way how we send the data. But again, there is no solution that fits everyone. Try it, give us your feedback, and we are open to even to add things and to enhance. So it's open, but it's something that is already used, and we are equipping a lot of vessels with that, so they don't need to have a doctor on board, especially when they were blocked during the pandemic.
Oh, great. So the message is give it a go and then feedback, and you'll keep building and refining accordingly. Great, that sounds excellent. So the next question from the audience is from Nicola again, and it's to both of you this time. Do we need to get worried about space litter orbiting and damaging critical satellite equipment?
I think it's an issue that's being taken quite seriously and is being addressed, I think. And the concern is probably not unfounded. You know, we're seeing lots and lots of satellite operators coming into the space, and there's lots of other things being put into space as well. So inevitably, as we put more stuff into space, there's going to be concerns about congestion. I mean, we're part of several initiatives at the kind of intergovernmental level to make sure that we're part of that debate and we're addressing it and dealing with it responsibly. So.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Nabil, would you like to comment?
We are not putting anything in space. We will try to make the maximum use out of it.
Very good, very good. Okay, we don't have much time left, so I'm just going to ask you probably one last question, actually, which is about collaboration between the humanitarian sector and the commercial sectors. And you've already said, you know, if people feed back to you, you can keep building good solutions, which is really encouraging to hear. I wonder, the private sector by necessity invests in innovation, as you've been describing to us, and the humanitarian world is often able to benefit from that. Do you see the need and opportunity for greater disruptive approaches in the next few years to keep up with the changes that we need? Or do you subscribe to a more iterative, little by little improvement, a bit like the Olympic goals that the UK won for cycling? What are your thoughts about that, Nabil?
It's something in the middle. There will be nothing, I would say, nothing for there will be a lot for the consumer side, It will be a huge change with all what is announced in terms of LEO coming, LEO satellites. That will change a lot for the consumer market, and maybe for what we call the welfare part of the humanitarian. But that will not be reliable, that will not be everywhere, and we don't have a real visibility on that. I doubt it will change the real operation today. But we are not at 1% because all the satellite operators are in a phase of changing their constellation. So let me say that the satellite operator, they change once every 15 years. And all of them are changing in those 5 years. They're bringing new constellations. So it means that they will not enhance by 1%, but at least by 20–30% at least.
Thank you. Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need both, right? I mean, we've had lots of incremental and radical improvement in our network over the years, and there are big shifts, as Nabil has alluded to. I mean, the LEO constellations, the tech giants going after every industry, and we're no exception, and that will cause change. I mean, it causes us to look at our own product roadmap today and make sure that we are completely fit for purpose and we're investing. So it gives us a kick to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to the community. So I think there's room for both, and it's both positive.
So we need to watch this space and see how things continue to change in the future. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I've got loads more questions and finding this really interesting, but it really remains for me to say thank you to you both for bringing your experiences and insights. I think it is really heartening to see how these solutions can help humanitarian operations be more effective and more flexible. So thank you for all the work that you do and share with us. And thank you to the audience for some really, really interesting questions. I guess if people want to take it offline, they can get in touch with you through the organisers and follow up any questions they might specifically have for you. But thank you very much for your time today, and thanks to the audience for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.